Emily woke once again to the sound of rain hitting the roof of her house, but the more intense and disturbing sound was that of her own thoughts. She knew what was about to happen. Another day was beginning, and, with it, the promise of another cycle of violence. The cold wind coming through the open window made her body tremble, but it wasn't the weather that made her freeze. Fear paralyzed her. Hesitantly, she got out of bed, feeling every muscle in her body ache. The marks from previous assaults were still visible, purple bruises that told a story she preferred to hide. Emily headed to the bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the mirror. She knew that if she looked, she would see a stranger in place of the confident woman she once was. Horizon Ranch, located on the outskirts of Riverdale, Georgia, was known in the region for the beauty of its lands and the wealth of its production. But the high walls of the main house hid the reality that Emily had faced for 8 years, since she married Robert Mitchell, one of the most powerful and feared ranchers in the region. "Emily, where's the coffee?" Robert's deep, irritated voice echoed through the house, making Emily hurry. She descended the stairs in silence, each step calculated not to provoke more irritation. The living room was dimly lit, with the curtains still closed. Robert was sitting in the leather armchair, his bloodshot eyes betraying a night of heavy drinking. "Good morning, Robert," she said quietly as she passed him on her way to the kitchen. He grabbed her arm forcefully, forcing her to face him. "Do you know what time it is? You should have been up a long time ago." "I'm sorry, I didn't hear the alarm," she lied, knowing any explanation would be useless. Robert released her with a push that made her stagger. "Prepare that coffee quickly. I have a meeting with buyers from the city, and I can't be late because of your incompetence." In the kitchen, Emily moved automatically. Her gestures were mechanical, the result of years living in that routine of fear and submission. Through the window, she could see the stable where Hercules, the buffalo she had rescued 5 years earlier, was confined. Hercules wasn't an ordinary animal. Emily had found him as a calf, injured and abandoned after a police operation against wildlife traffickers. Since then, an inexplicable connection had formed between them. It was as if the immense animal could feel her emotions, always remaining alert when Robert was nearby. While serving coffee, Emily noticed that Robert's hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't the first time she had noticed this symptom. In recent months, he had been showing signs of growing nervousness, often accompanied by even more intense bouts of anger. "Sales are falling," he commented between sips of the steaming coffee. "That damn Sanders is buying the surrounding lands and trying to suffocate me." James Sanders was the new owner of the neighboring ranch. Unlike Robert, he was known for fair treatment of employees and respect for the environment. Since his arrival 6 months ago, Robert had harbored an instant dislike for the man. "Maybe you could talk, seek a partnership," Emily suggested immediately, regretting it. The cup flew across the kitchen, shattering against the wall and leaving a trail of coffee. "I don't need advice from a woman who can't even keep the house in order." Robert stood up, advancing toward her. "Clean up this mess, and don't forget to feed that useless buffalo before I decide to get rid of him once and for all." After his departure, Emily collapsed on the kitchen floor, tears finally escaping. Through the window she saw Hercules restless, moving from one side to the other. It was as if the animal could sense her anguish. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The Riverdale Market brought the central square to life on Wednesdays. Emily took advantage of these mornings to leave the ranch with the excuse of buying supplies. It was one of the few moments of freedom she had, always timed by Robert, who demanded her return at an exact time. That Wednesday, the sky was clear after days of heavy rain. Emily wore a long-sleeved blouse despite the heat to hide the marks on her arms. Her face, disguised with makeup, didn't reveal the recent bruises, but her eyes carried an emptiness that was impossible to conceal. "Emily," a female voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Is that really you?" Turning around, she recognized Lucy, her friend from college days. It had been almost 5 years since they had seen each other, since Robert had forbidden Emily from maintaining contact with old friendships. "Lucy," she exclaimed, genuinely surprised. The two embraced, but Emily couldn't help a pained expression when Lucy squeezed her bruised shoulders. "What happened? Are you okay?" asked Lucy, stepping back to observe her better. "I'm great, just a little tired." Emily forced a smile. "What are you doing in Riverdale? I thought you were living in New York." "I came back 2 months ago. I'm working at the New Beginnings NGO here in town." Lucy paused, studying her friend's face. "Actually, we have a support project for women in vulnerable situations." The irony wasn't lost on Emily. There was her friend working exactly with the kind of help she desperately needed, but didn't have the courage to ask for. "What important work," she commented, averting her gaze. "Why don't you come see our headquarters?" "It's close by," Lucy invited. "We can have coffee and catch up." Emily nervously checked her watch. She still had almost an hour before she needed to return. "All right, but I need to be quick." The New Beginnings Support Center operated in a simple house painted vibrant yellow. At the entrance, a mural showed photos of smiling women in craft workshops and professional courses. Emily felt a tightness in her chest, seeing those faces full of hope. In Lucy's office, a psychologist named Deborah joined them. Emily noticed the glances exchanged between the two when she accidentally lifted her sleeve, revealing part of a bruise. "Emily," Deborah began in a soft voice, "you know you can count on us for anything, right? Everything we discuss here is confidential." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily responded defensively, pulling her sleeve down. "Friend," Lucy held her hands, "we see this every day. We recognize the signs. You're not alone." For a moment, Emily felt a wave of relief at the thought of sharing her burden, but fear soon took over. Robert had contacts throughout the town. If he discovered she was talking about her situation... "I have to go," she stood up abruptly. "Robert is waiting for me." "Take this." Deborah handed her a discreet card. "It's my personal number. You can call me anytime, for any reason." On the way back to the ranch, Emily hid the card deep in her purse, like a forbidden treasure. Her mind was buzzing with possibilities she had never considered before. Upon arrival, she found Robert on the porch, watching as James Sanders, the neighbor, parked his car at the entrance to the ranch. "What is he doing here?" asked Emily, tensing up as she saw her husband's irritated expression. "He came to propose a partnership," Robert answered through gritted teeth. "As if I needed to associate with someone." Sanders was the opposite of Robert. Tall, with a calm appearance and an easy smile, he greeted Emily politely before being led to the office by Robert, who shot a warning look at his wife. Restless, Emily went to the stable to see Hercules. The buffalo greeted her with a gentle movement of his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on her. "If I could run away, I'd take you with me," she whispered, stroking the animal's rough fur. At that moment, she heard raised voices coming from the house. Robert and Sanders were arguing. Cautiously approaching, Emily positioned herself near the office window. "Your accusations are serious, Mitchell," Sanders was saying firmly, "but I have evidence. I know what you've been doing, and it's not just with your wife." Emily quickly stepped away from the window when she realized the discussion was ending. Her heart was racing as she tried to process what she had just heard. What evidence did Sanders have against Robert? What else was her husband hiding besides domestic violence? She barely had time to compose herself when Robert stormed out of the office, his face red with anger. Sanders followed, maintaining a calm demeanor that seemed to infuriate the rancher even more. "Think carefully about what you're risking, Mitchell," warned Sanders, adjusting his hat. "You have until the end of the week to give me an answer." After Sanders' departure, a heavy silence fell over the house. Robert poured himself a generous shot of whiskey, emptying the glass in a single gulp. "What did that man want?" Emily risked asking, keeping her distance. "Nothing that concerns you," Robert replied dryly. "Prepare dinner. We'll have visitors. Tonight." "Visitors? Who?" "Mayor Thompson and Sheriff Ferris, and I want everything perfect. Understood?" That was unusual. Robert rarely brought important people to the ranch, preferring to meet them in town. Something was happening, and Emily felt that Sanders' words had something to do with this sudden meeting. While preparing dinner, Emily overheard Robert on the phone, his voice tense and low, as if he feared being heard. Fragments of sentences. Reach the kitchen. Fake documents, Cherokee land base. Nobody will find out. Night fell over Horizon Ranch, bringing with it an almost palpable tension. At 8 o'clock sharp, Mayor August Thompson arrived, accompanied by Sheriff Charles Ferris. Emily, wearing a dress that hid the marks on her body, received the guests with the hospitality that Robert demanded. "What a pleasure to welcome you to our home," she smiled, playing the role of the perfect wife. "The pleasure is ours, my dear," replied the mayor, a portly, middle-aged man with a political smile on his lips. "Your house is magnificent, as always." Sheriff Ferris, for his part, merely nodded, his keen eyes scanning the environment. He was a man of few words, known for his incorruptibility, which made his presence at this dinner all the more intriguing. During the meal, conversation flowed artificially, with trivial subjects dominating the first hour. It was only when Emily served coffee that Robert addressed the real reason for the meeting. "I imagine you're curious about the reason for this dinner," he began, leaning over the table. "We have a problem called James Sanders." The mayor exchanged a quick glance with the sheriff before responding. "What kind of problem exactly, Robert?" "He's investigating land ownership records in the region." Robert paused, looking significantly at the two men, including those we regularized last year. A tense silence fell over the room. Emily, serving more coffee, realized she had touched on something much bigger than she imagined. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mitchell," replied the sheriff coldly. "If there are irregularities in land records, that is certainly a matter for the police." "Come on, Ferris, we're all friends here." Robert forced a smile. "You know full well that those lands could never have been regularized. The Cherokee have ancestral rights to them." "I've never been complicit in illegalities," the sheriff stood up, placing his napkin on the table. "And I won't start now." Robert also stood up, his face contorted in a threatening expression. "Think carefully, Ferris. There are a lot of important people involved in this." The mayor tried to calm things down. "Let's take it easy, gentlemen. I'm sure we can resolve this in a civilized manner." But the sheriff had already made up his mind. "I'm going to investigate every document, every signature. If I find irregularities, no matter who's involved, the law will be applied." After the guests left, Robert unleashed his frustration on the living room furniture, breaking a vase and throwing objects against the wall. Emily remained motionless, knowing that any movement could direct that anger toward her. "It's all that damn Sanders' fault," Robert vociferated. "He's ruining everything." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The revelations from the conversation echoed in her mind. Robert was involved in something illegal, something related to the region's lands, and Sanders, for some reason, was determined to expose the truth. For the first time, Emily glimpsed a possibility of escape. If Robert were investigated, if his illegal activities came to light, perhaps she could finally be free. But how could she help with this investigation without putting herself at even greater risk? The answer came when she remembered the card that Deborah had given her. Perhaps the New Beginnings NGO would be the starting point for her liberation. The next morning, Robert left early to resolve urgent business in town. His absence gave Emily a rare opportunity to act freely. With trembling hands, she retrieved Deborah's card from the bottom of her purse and dialed the number. "Hello?" The psychologist's voice answered after 3 rings. "Deborah, it's Emily." She spoke softly, even knowing she was alone. "I need help." 20 minutes later, Emily was on her way to the New Beginnings headquarters, having invented a shopping list to justify her departure, in case Robert unexpectedly returned. Upon arrival, she was received by Deborah and Lucy, their faces showing concern and relief. "You've taken the first step, Emily," said Deborah, guiding her to a private room. "And that's always the most difficult." During the next hour, Emily finally opened up. She told them about the 8 years of abuse, about the constant fear, about the feeling of being trapped with no way out, and finally she revealed what she had discovered the night before. "Robert is involved in some illegal land scheme," she explained. her voice firmer now. "Something related to Cherokee lands. Sheriff Ferris seemed willing to investigate, but I don't know if he'll actually do anything." Lucy and Deborah exchanged significant looks. "This connects with other cases we've been following," commented Lucy. "There have been reports of land grabbing throughout the region, mainly in Cherokee reservation areas." "And where does James Sanders fit into all of this?" asked Emily, confused about the neighboring rancher's role in the story. "Sanders isn't just a rancher," explained Deborah. "He's a lawyer specializing in indigenous and environmental rights. He bought those lands strategically to investigate what's happening in the region." The revelation hit Emily like a bombshell. Sanders wasn't just an annoying neighbor. He was someone on a mission to expose the illegalities that Robert and his associates were committing. "We need to act cautiously," continued Lucy. "Robert is powerful and has many allies, but if we can gather enough evidence—" The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Helena, the NGO's secretary, with an urgent expression on her face. "Excuse the interruption, but James Sanders is here. He says it's important." Sanders entered the room, surprised to see Emily. "Mrs. Mitchell, I didn't expect to find you here," he commented, genuinely surprised. "Emily is helping us with some important information," Deborah intervened diplomatically. Sanders nodded, instantly understanding the situation. "I came because I received worrying news," he said, sitting down. "Sheriff Ferris had an accident this morning. He's in the hospital with serious injuries after his patrol car went off the road in the Blue Ridge Mountains." "Accident?" Emily felt a chill. "Robert left early today, said he had urgent business." "Exactly what I thought," confirmed Sanders. "This wasn't a coincidence. Ferris was determined to start the investigations today." The group remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Robert was willing to do anything to protect his interests, even attack a law enforcement officer. "This changes everything," said Lucy, finally. "We can't wait for official justice. We need to act on our own." "It's very risky," warned Deborah, looking at Emily, "especially for you who lives with him." "Maybe it's not so risky if we have a careful plan," intervened Sanders. "I've been gathering documents and evidence for months, but I need something concrete from Robert himself to close the case." Emily felt all eyes turn to her. She immediately understood what was being suggested. She would be the insider, the one who could access the incriminating evidence. "There's a safe in his office," she revealed, after a moment of hesitation. "Robert keeps important documents there. He's always careful to make sure I don't see when he opens it, but I've observed enough to know the combination." "That would be extremely dangerous," warned Deborah. "If he caught you—" "More dangerous is continuing to live like this," replied Emily with a firmness that surprised everyone, including herself. "Besides, he'll be away on Friday. He's going to a meeting in Atlanta and won't be back until Saturday." Sanders knelt before her, his eyes conveying a solemn seriousness. "Mrs. Mitchell, Emily, I wouldn't ask you this if there were another way, but these lands legally belong to the Cherokee people. Entire families are being driven from their homes." The next 2 days were a test of nerves for Emily. Every gesture, every word needed to be calculated not to arouse Robert's suspicions. He was more irritable than ever, constantly on the phone, talking in a low voice with his associates. News about Sheriff Ferris's accident was in all the local newspapers, but no one dared to publicly suggest it might have been more than an unfortunate coincidence. On Thursday night, the eve of Robert's trip, Emily was meticulously preparing his suitcase while he supervised, as if he didn't trust her even with this simple task. "Remember to pack the blue suit," he instructed, watching each piece she folded. "And don't forget, I'll need the documents from the safe, the ones in the red folder." Emily felt her heart race. This was the first time Robert had explicitly mentioned the contents of the safe in her presence. "Which red folder?" she asked, feigning ignorance, taking the opportunity to obtain more information. Robert gave her an irritated look. "Don't play dumb. The folder with the West Bank property records." He paused, studying her suspiciously. "Why the sudden interest?" "It's not interest. I just want to make sure I don't forget anything," Emily responded, forcing naturalness. "You get so angry when I make mistakes." The explanation seemed to momentarily satisfy him. Robert finished a drink and continued. "I'll be back Saturday afternoon. I don't want to hear about any visitors while I'm gone, understood? You stay home, take care of your chores, and no conversations with that friend of yours from town." "What? Friend?" Emily felt a chill down her spine, fearing he knew about her contact with Lucy. "Don't take me for an idiot," Robert approached, holding her chin firmly. "I know you met that woman from college. My eyes are everywhere in this town, Emily. Don't forget that." That night, lying beside Robert, Emily remained awake, her body tense, her mind calculating every step of the risky plan she would execute the next day. In the morning, Robert left early, not without reminding her once more that she would be watched even from a distance. As soon as the car disappeared down the road, Emily ran to the phone. She called Deborah first, confirming that the plan was in motion. Then she called Joseph, Hercules' caretaker, an elderly man who was one of the few employees who showed any sympathy for her. "Joseph, you can take the day off today. I'll look after Hercules." The employee thanked her without asking questions. His loyalty was to Robert, but he had a special affection for Emily, who had always treated him with respect, unlike her husband. At 10 in the morning, as agreed, Sanders arrived at the ranch in a discreet car, parking at the back of the property, away from the curious eyes of the few employees who remained working. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked as he cautiously entered through the back door. "We can still look for another way." "No, this is our only chance," replied Emily, guiding him to the office. "Robert took some documents, but I know the majority are still in the safe." Robert's office was an imposing room, decorated with hunting trophies and photographs, where he appeared alongside influential politicians and businessmen. Behind a screen disguised as part of the decor was the safe. Emily approached, her hands sweaty, and began to turn the dial, remembering the sequence of numbers she had memorized after months of secretly observing Robert. Right 25, left 14, right 36, left 7. A satisfying click indicated that the combination was correct. Sanders watched, impressed with the courage of this woman who, until a few days ago, had seemed completely submissive to her husband. Inside the safe, organized in different folders, was the evidence they were looking for: falsified deeds, receipts for bribes, compromising photographs, official documents with forged signatures, her veritable treasure trove of evidence of the corruption that Robert orchestrated. "My God," murmured Sanders, quickly leafing through one of the folders. "This is much bigger than we imagined. It's not just grabbing Cherokee lands. He's diverting money from federal programs, tampering with environmental reports." While Sanders methodically photographed each document, Emily remained alert to any strange movement in the house. The plan was for Lucy to arrive at 11 with a special flash drive to copy files from Robert's computer, but it was already 11:15 and there was no sign of her. "Something's wrong," commented Emily nervously. "Lucy is never late." As if to confirm her fears, the house phone rang. Emily answered, immediately recognizing Deborah's agitated voice. "Emily, Robert is coming back." Lucy saw him on the road less than 20 minutes from the ranch. The meeting in Atlanta was cancelled. Emily's blood ran cold. 20 minutes. It was enough time for Sanders to leave, but not to finish recording all the evidence. "We need to go," she said, hanging up the phone. "Robert is coming back. We have to get out of here now." Sanders looked at the documents, clearly frustrated. "But there are still several." "There's no time," insisted Emily, beginning to replace the folders in the safe. "If he finds us here..." If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway announced Robert's arrival sooner than expected. Emily and Sanders exchanged panicked looks as they finished replacing the documents in the safe. "Go out the back," whispered Emily, closing the safe with trembling hands. "Meet Lucy on the road and take what we managed to get." "I can't leave you here alone," protested Sanders. "He'll suspect." "There's no choice. If he finds us together, everything will be lost." Reluctantly, Sanders headed for the back exit, while Emily quickly tidied the office, erasing any trace of their presence. She barely had time to return to the living room when the front door opened violently. Robert entered like a storm, his eyes scanning every corner of the room until they fixed on Emily. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice laden with suspicion. "Just tidying the house," she answered, forcing naturalness. "I wasn't expecting you so early." "The meeting was cancelled," he interrupted, approaching. "Or rather, it never existed. It was just a test, Emily, and you failed." Her blood froze. Robert pulled a small electronic device from his pocket, showing it with a sinister smile. "You think I'm a fool? I installed cameras throughout the house weeks ago." His face contorted with rage. "I saw you and Sanders in my office. I saw everything." Emily took a step back, feeling the cold wall against her back. There was nowhere to run. "It's not what you're thinking," she tried to argue, her voice failing. "No?" Robert laughed, a humorless sound. "Then explain to me why my wife was showing my private documents to a man who's trying to destroy me." Chahan advanced, cornering her against the wall. The smell of alcohol on his breath indicated he had been drinking during the trip, making him even more unpredictable. "You betrayed me, Emily, in every possible way." The first blow hit the wall beside her face, making her shrink in fear. Robert had never been so explicitly threatening. "Robert, please," she begged. "Let's talk." "Talk?" he shouted, knocking over a nearby vase. "The talk is over. 8 years, Emily. 8 years giving you everything a woman could want, and this is how you repay me?" Emily knew she needed to buy time. Sanders had probably already left the property. But what if Robert decided to pursue him? What if the evidence they had obtained wasn't sufficient? "What you're doing is illegal, Robert," she said, finding courage from a place she didn't know existed within her. "Those lands belong to the Cherokee. You're destroying lives." His face transformed into a mask of fury. "Since when do you care?" "About Indians?" he vociferated, approaching again. "Your life of comfort, your jewelry, your expensive clothes, all of that comes from my work. And now you turn against me?" Robert raised his hand again, but this time Emily didn't cower. Something had changed inside her. The fear was still there, pulsating, but now it was accompanied by a fierce determination. "Hit me, Robert," she challenged, looking him directly in the eyes. "Show once more what kind of man you really are. A coward who only knows how to resolve things with violence." The provocation had an effect. Robert hesitated, surprised by this new Emily who dared to confront him. "You're nobody without me," he said, trying to regain control. "Where will you run to? Who will believe you against me?" "Everyone will believe," replied Emily, "because I'm not the only one with evidence against you." At that moment, a noise coming from the stable attracted both their attention. Hercules the buffalo was violently agitated, as if sensing the tension in the air. "That damn animal," grumbled Robert, "always getting agitated when I'm around. I should have gotten rid of him a long time ago." Robert headed for the door, his eyes injected with rage. "I'm going to solve this once and for all, and afterward, you and I are going to have a definitive conversation." As he went out toward the stable, Emily took the opportunity to grab the phone. She quickly dialed Deborah's number. "He discovered everything," she whispered desperately. "He's out of control. I need help now." Without waiting for a response, she hung up and ran outside, following Robert. The sun was at its zenith, illuminating the scene unfolding at the stable. Robert, armed with a piece of wood, menacingly approaching Hercules. "Robert, no!" shouted Emily, running in his direction. He turned, surprised, and at that moment, Hercules took advantage to charge against the fence, breaking it with his impressive strength. The buffalo positioned itself between Emily and Robert, like a protective guardian, menacingly snorting at the man who was raising the wooden plank. The scene that unfolded in the ranch yard seemed unreal. Hercules, the immense buffalo, stood firm between Emily and Robert, his dark eyes fixed on the man wielding the piece of wood. The animal snorted, pawing the ground in a clear, protective posture. "Get out of the way," Robert shouted at the animal, as if it could understand him. "This is between me and my wife." Emily remained paralyzed for a few moments, observing this strange confrontation. It was as if Hercules somehow had understood her desperation, her need for protection, This animal she had saved years ago was now trying to return the favor. "Robert, put that down," she pleaded, finding her voice again. "You'll hurt yourself." "Hurt?" He laughed, out of control. "This useless beast doesn't scare me. And you're going to learn once and for all what your place is." The rancher took a step forward, and Hercules reacted immediately, advancing. A few inches, increasing the intensity of his snorting. It was a dangerous impasse. "Please, Robert," Emily tried again. "Let's talk like civilized people." "Civilized?" He spat the words. "After you betrayed me with that little lawyer, after you invaded my office, messed with my documents, there's no more talking, Emily. It's over." Robert raised the piece of wood and advanced toward the buffalo, which was now also moving, creating a tense circle in the yard. Emily took advantage of the distraction to run toward the house. She needed to reach the phone again, call for help, do something to prevent a tragedy. Inside the house, she frantically dialed the NGO's number, but before she could speak, she felt the device being torn from her hands. Robert had entered, leaving Hercules outside, where the animal continued to be agitated, trying to break through the reinforced fence again. "Calling who?" asked Robert, hurling the phone against the wall, shattering it. "Your lover? The police? Nobody's going to help you, Emily, nobody." She backed away, seeking any object she could use to defend herself. Her gaze fell on a heavy, bronze statuette on the side table, a gift he had received from a politician in gratitude for services rendered. Without thinking twice, she grabbed it. "Don't come any closer," she warned, raising the statuette. "I'm tired of being afraid. Robert, 8 years enduring your abuse, your humiliations, it's over." His laughter echoed through the room, a mixture of anger and incredulity. "Look at you, so brave now." He advanced slowly. "What changed, Emily? Was it that lawyer? Did he fill you with promises, with hopes?" "What changed is that I finally understood I don't need you," she responded, holding firm, "that I can rebuild my life away from this hell you created." Robert stopped, studying her with an expression difficult to decipher. "You're not going anywhere," he said finally. "This is your home, your place, by my side where you've always been." "No, Robert, not anymore." At that moment, the sound of tires braking abruptly at the ranch entrance attracted both their attention. Through the window, Emily saw 3 cars approaching. Sheriff Ferris's, who had apparently recovered enough to return to work, Sanders, and a third she didn't recognize. Robert also saw, and his face paled. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with fury. "What I should have done a long time ago," replied Emily, feeling a wave of relief course through her body. "End this farce." The rancher looked around like a cornered animal seeking an exit. His eyes finally landed on a side door that led to the back of the property. Without thinking twice, he ran in that direction. "A coward to the end," murmured Emily, watching him flee. She knew he wouldn't get far. The neighboring lands belonged to Sanders, and there would certainly be officers strategically positioned around the property. Robert's escape was just the desperate last act of a man who had lost everything. The front door opened, and Sheriff Ferris entered, accompanied by Sanders and Deborah. The psychologist's face lit up when she saw Emily standing, apparently unharmed. "Are you okay?" she asked, hugging her. "I am," replied Emily, surprised to realize she wasn't lying. Despite everything, she felt stronger than ever. Robert fled out the back. The sheriff nodded, signaling to the officers accompanying him. "Don't worry, he won't get far. The property is surrounded." Sanders approached, his eyes revealing admiration and concern. "We did it, Emily. The evidence we obtained was sufficient for an arrest warrant. Robert will be indicted for multiple crimes." Emily nodded, trying to process the information. Was it over? Really over? After so many years, the possibility of freedom seemed almost unreal, like a dream from which she feared waking. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly feeling lost. Deborah gently squeezed her hand. "Now you begin to rebuild your life, step by step, without rush. And you won't be alone, I promise." 3 months passed since that fateful afternoon at Horizon Ranch. Spring had arrived in Riverdale, bringing with it an explosion of colors and life. as if nature itself was celebrating the changes that had occurred. Emily watched the sunrise from the porch of her new house, a simple but welcoming building on the outskirts of town. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the perfume of garden flowers, creating an atmosphere of peace that still seemed strange after so many years of constant fear. "Good morning," greeted Lucy, coming out of the house with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "Did you sleep well?" Emily smiled, accepting the hot beverage. "Better each day," she answered honestly. The first weeks after Robert's arrest had been the most difficult. After years of being controlled, the sudden freedom brought with it a feeling of emptiness and disorientation that Emily wasn't prepared to face. The nights were populated by nightmares, and the days by anxiety attacks that left her paralyzed. It was at this moment that the true support network formed around her. Lucy offered her a room in her house until Emily could reorganize herself. Deborah conducted almost daily therapy sessions, helping her process the trauma she had lived through. And surprisingly, Sanders became a constant friend, helping her deal with the legal aspects of her situation. Horizon Ranch, which held so many painful memories, was placed under investigation and subsequently confiscated by the authorities. The illegally appropriated lands were returned to the Cherokee people in a process that was still in the courts, but which already showed significant progress. "Ready for today?" asked Lucy, interrupting her thoughts. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. "I think so," she answered, looking at the clock. "I just need to get ready." That day marked a new chapter in her life. Emily would begin her work as a volunteer at the New Beginnings NGO, helping other women who were living in situations similar to hers. Deborah had suggested the activity as part of her healing process, a way to transform her pain into something positive. As she prepared, Emily reflected on recent events. Robert was awaiting trial, accused of multiple crimes ranging from domestic violence to fraud and corruption. The scheme of grabbing Cherokee lands turned out to be even bigger than imagined, involving high-ranking politicians and influential businessmen in the region. The case had gained national attention, with journalists from major networks installed in Riverdale to follow the developments. Emily had given only one interview to a journalist specializing in women's rights. She spoke about her experience, not to expose her suffering, but to show other victims that there was hope, that it was possible to start over. "The car has arrived," announced Lucy, knocking gently on the bedroom door. Emily gave a final touch to her simple makeup. In the mirror, a different woman stared back at her, not just for the absence of bruises and the renewed sparkle in her eyes, but for a posture that radiated a tranquil strength, won at a steep price. On the way to the NGO headquarters, Emily looked out the window, observing the town she now saw with new eyes. Riverdale was no longer a prison, but a place of possibilities. Upon arrival, they were received by Deborah, who was smiling widely. "We have a surprise for you," said the psychologist, guiding them to the back of the property. There, in a newly constructed enclosed space, was Hercules. The buffalo raised his head upon seeing Emily, emitting a soft sound of recognition. "How?" asked Emily, moved, approaching the fence. "Sanders secured temporary custody of him," explained Deborah. "We're developing an animal-assisted therapy project, and we thought Hercules would be perfect, especially because you already have a special connection." Emily extended her hand, caressing the rough fur of the animal that had, in a way, been her protector on that crucial day. "Thank you for taking care of him," she said, feeling tears of gratitude forming in her eyes. "Actually," intervened Lucy, "the idea is for you to take care of him. It will be part of your work here. Many of the women we serve would benefit from contact with animals, and you know Hercules better than anyone." The proposal caught Emily by surprise, but it made perfect sense. This animal represented a link to her past, but also symbolized the protection and strength that helped her move forward. "I accept," she replied, smiling. At that moment, as she stroked Hercules and felt the warmth of the sun on her face, Emily was certain that despite all the scars, she was on the right path. A new beginning wasn't just possible, but was already happening day by day, choice after choice. Later, in her first meeting with the women served by the NGO, Emily shared her story without romanticizing the suffering, but emphasizing the possibility of reconstruction. She talked about fear, loneliness, the feeling of having no way out, but she also talked about courage, about asking for help, about finding strength in unexpected places. Each of us has our own journey, she concluded, looking at the attentive faces surrounding her. There are no magic formulas, no instant solutions. But there is hope. There is always hope. 6 months had passed since Emily began her work at the New Beginnings NGO. Winter was coming to Riverdale, bringing with it a cool breeze and the aroma of wet earth after the first rains. At the organization's headquarters, preparations for the year-end event were in full swing. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Deborah, as they organized chairs in the main hall. Emily nodded, arranging the informational pamphlets on the table. "I've never been so sure," she replied. "It's the next step." That night's event wouldn't just be a celebration of the results achieved by the NGO throughout the year, but would also mark the official launch of the New Horizons project, conceived by Emily. The program aimed to offer professional training and emotional support for women in vulnerable situations, especially victims of domestic violence. The name of the project was no coincidence. Emily had deliberately chosen to redefine the word horizon, previously associated with the ranch that had been the scene of so much suffering, transforming it into a symbol of hope and possibilities. "The journalists will start arriving in an hour," informed Lucy, consulting her list. Regional TV confirmed their presence, and that reporter from the national magazine is coming too. "And what about the special guests?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucy smiled, understanding her friend's anxiety. "All confirmed, including your mother and your brother." Emily felt a lump in her throat. The reunion with her family was something that both tormented and delighted her in equal measure. In the first years of marriage, Robert had systematically isolated her from her relatives, creating conflicts and spreading lies that eventually resulted in a painful separation. Only after his arrest had Emily managed to re-establish contact, initiating a slow process of reconciliation and clarification. "Nervous?" asked Deborah, noticing her expression. "A little," admitted Emily. "It's been so long." "They'll understand," reassured the psychologist. "Manipulation processes like those Robert used are devastating for family relationships. But you have time now. You don't need to resolve everything in one night." The advice was sensible, as always. Over the months, Deborah had become not just her therapist, but a mentor and friend, guiding her through the complex paths of emotional recovery and self-rediscovery. As they finished the preparations, Sanders arrived, accompanied by representatives from the District Attorney's Office and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The investigation into the land-grabbing scheme continued to advance, with new developments each week. Robert remained in jail awaiting trial, but had already been convicted in one of the cases, receiving a significant sentence. "Everything ready for the big night?" asked Sanders, approaching Emily with a warm smile. "Almost," she replied, returning the smile. "Just need to bring Hercules over." The buffalo had become an integral part of the NGO's therapeutic program. His calm presence had a remarkably positive effect on the women served, especially the most traumatized ones. There was something in the gentleness of such a powerful animal that conveyed a sense of security. Sanders offered to help her fetch Hercules from the pasture at the back of the property. On the way, they talked about recent advances in the case of the Cherokee lands. "The Cherokee community has already begun to reoccupy part of the territory," explained Sanders, "and we're facing resistance from some ranchers, but public opinion support has been crucial." "And the land of the former Horizon Ranch?" asked Emily, still feeling a slight discomfort at mentioning the place. "It will be transformed into a cultural and environmental center, managed by the Cherokee themselves." Sanders paused, observing her carefully. "Actually, they would like to invite you to the inauguration ceremony." The news caught Emily by surprise. Returning to that place would mean reliving painful memories, but it would also be a form of closure, of definitively turning the page. "I'll go," she decided after a moment of reflection. "I need to do this." When they reached the pasture, Hercules immediately came to meet them, recognizing Emily. The bond between the two had strengthened even more in recent months. It was almost as if the animal understood everything they had been through together. "Sometimes I wonder if he knows," commented Emily, as they guided Hercules to the space prepared for him near the main hall. "If he understands the role he played in my life." "Animals perceive much more than we imagine," replied Sanders, "especially those that have been through trauma. It creates a kind of empathic connection." When they returned to the hall, the first guests were already beginning to arrive. Emily briefly withdrew to prepare, changing from casual clothes into a light blue dress that Lucy had insisted she buy for the occasion. In the small room that served as an improvised dressing room, Emily observed her reflection in the mirror. The woman who stared back at her was transformed, not just externally but in her essence. The eyes, once constantly lowered and fearful, now maintained their gaze firmly. The body, once always bent as if trying to occupy the least space possible, now held itself erect, with a serene dignity. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Emily?" Lucy's voice sounded hesitant. "Your parents are here." Taking a deep breath, Emily opened the door. In the hallway besides Lucy were her mother, Teresa, and her younger brother, Peter. There was a moment of silence, laden with contained emotion, before Teresa stepped forward, enveloping her daughter in a tight hug. "My daughter," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Forgive me for not seeing, for not doing anything." "No, Mom," interrupted Emily, feeling her own tears escape. "The fault was never yours. Robert manipulated all of us." The night of the event at New Beginnings NGO exceeded all expectations. The hall, decorated with simplicity and elegance, housed about 100 people, from local authorities and press representatives to the women served by the organization and their families. The New Horizons project was officially launched with emotional speeches and the commitment to expand its activities to other towns in the region. Emily, who had never imagined herself speaking in public, found herself at the center of attention, sharing her vision for the future of the program. Her voice, firm and clear, echoed in the silent hall where each word was absorbed with attention. "What we seek is not just to offer a temporary refuge," she explained, looking at the attentive faces surrounding her. "We want to create conditions for each woman to find her own strength, her independence. Because we know that true freedom comes from within, from the ability to recognize our worth and our rights." At the end of her speech, the audience applauded standing. In her mother, Teresa's eyes, tears of pride shone. The reunion with her family was smoother than Emily had feared. There were wounds to heal, truths to be told, but the love and relief of being together again prevailed over any past resentment. After the event, when most of the guests had already left, Emily found herself alone with Sanders in the outside area where Hercules rested peacefully in his improvised enclosure. "You were incredible today," he commented, offering her a cup of tea. "I never doubted you would be, but seeing you like this, so strong and determined, it's inspiring." Emily accepted the beverage, feeling the warmth of the liquid contrast with the cool evening breeze. "I still have difficult moments," she admitted, looking at the starry sky. "Days when I wake up frightened, thinking I'm still there in that house with him." "And that will probably continue to happen for a while," replied Sanders understandingly. "Traumas don't disappear overnight, but you're moving forward, and that's what matters." They remained in silence for a few minutes, a comfortable silence, of the kind that only exists between people who share a deep understanding. "Do you believe things happen for a reason?" asked Emily eventually. "That there's some greater purpose behind suffering?" Sanders reflected for a moment before responding. "I don't know if suffering itself has a purpose, but I think what we do with it does." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "I see this in my work with indigenous peoples, communities that have suffered historical injustices, transforming their pain into resistance, into cultural preservation, into the fight for rights. Not because suffering is necessary, but because resilience is a profound human response in the face of adversity." Emily nodded, deeply understanding what he was saying. Her own journey was testimony to this. A year ago, she could never have imagined where she would be today. The terrified woman, imprisoned in an abusive marriage, gave way to someone who now helped others find their own strength. The scars continued there, physically and emotionally, but they had been transformed into marks of a survivor, no longer of a victim. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't met Lucy that day at the market," said Emily thoughtfully. "If I hadn't met you all, the NGO—" "But you did," replied Sanders gently. "And that's what matters now. The future, not the past." At that moment, Deborah approached, bringing with her a surprise. The official invitation for Emily to assume the coordination of the New Horizons project, not just as a volunteer, but as a paid employee of the NGO. "No one is more qualified than you," argued Deborah, handing her the contract. "Your experience, your vision, your ability to connect with the women we serve, it's as if your entire path had prepared you for this." The offer caught Emily by surprise. It was a validation of all the transformation she had undergone, a recognition of her strength and her contribution. More than that, it was an opportunity to build something meaningful from the ruins of what had been her life. "I accept," she replied without hesitation. "With all my heart." The following week, Emily participated in the inauguration ceremony of the Cherokee Cultural and Environmental Center on the lands that previously housed Horizon Ranch. It was a day laden with emotions, but also healing. Where once there was a house that represented her personal prison, now there was a space for celebrating indigenous culture, environmental education, and preserving ancestral traditions. The leader of the Cherokee community, a woman of striking presence named Sarah, invited Emily to plant an oak seedling at the entrance to the center. The symbolic gesture represented new beginnings, new roots, the transformation of a place of pain into a space of hope. As she buried the small tree in the moist soil, Emily felt a sense of closure. That chapter of her life was finally sealed, giving way to possibilities she hadn't even dared to dream of before. Back at her house in town, Emily found a package waiting for her. Inside, a poetry book with a note from Sanders for new beginnings. The simple gesture touched her deeply. Over the past few months, the relationship between them had evolved slowly, with respect for the time Emily needed to heal, to rediscover who she was outside the context of the abusive marriage. That night, under the stars of Riverdale, Emily reflected on her journey. The path had been long and painful, but each step had led her exactly where she needed to be. The wounds, the scars, the fears, all now part of a greater story, of a transformation process that continued with each new day. Hercules, who now lived permanently at the NGO headquarters, had become a symbol of this transformation. The animal that had once protected her remained by her side, but now in a context of freedom, no longer confinement. The women served by the New Horizons project often asked Emily what the secret of her strength was. The answer was always in her story, in the honesty with which she shared her falls and rises, her fear and her courage. "There is no magic moment when everything is resolved," she would say in her conversation circles. "There is today, there is now, there is the decision to take one more step, even when it seems impossible. And one day, you look back and realize how far you've come." The next morning, as she prepared for another day of work at the NGO, Emily observed the sun rise through her bedroom window. The vibrant colors spread across the sky, promising a new day, new possibilities, new horizons. In that moment, she felt a deep certainty. No matter how dark the night, dawn always comes, and with it, the chance to begin again. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us what city you're watching from.